The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the presidential palace in Kadiyama, the capital of the West African nation of Sahelistan. President Marcus Konati sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, the weight of leadership evident in the lines that had deepened around his eyes over the past 3 years in office. At 42, he was considered young for a head of state, but the challenges he faced had aged him beyond his years. Sahelistan had been through turbulent times. The country, rich in gold and uranium deposits, had attracted the attention of various foreign powers, each seeking to influence its direction. Marcus had come to power on a platform of sovereignty and economic independence, promising to break free from the colonial-era agreements that had kept Sahelistan's resources flowing to foreign corporations while its people remained in poverty. The presidential office was a study in controlled elegance. Tall windows overlooked the sprawling gardens where peacocks roamed freely, their calls occasionally breaking the morning silence. The walls were adorned with traditional Sahelian art, bronze sculptures and colorful tapestries that told the story of a proud nation's history. But beneath this veneer of tranquility, tensions simmered. Marcus's personal secretary, Aminata Diallo, a sharp-minded woman in her 30s who had been with him since his days as a regional governor, entered quietly with his morning briefing. Her usually composed demeanor seemed slightly strained today. "Mr. President," she began, her voice carrying a subtle tension, "the intelligence reports are on your desk. There's been increased chatter in the international community about our recent mining agreements with China. The French ambassador has requested another meeting." Marcus looked up from the economic development proposal he'd been reviewing. The French had been particularly vocal about Sahelistan's shift away from traditional partnerships. "What kind of chatter, Aminata?" "The usual diplomatic pressure, sir. But there's something else." She hesitated, her fingers gripping the leather portfolio more tightly. "Our intelligence services have picked up unusual communication patterns. Foreign diplomatic channels have been unusually active, and there's been movement of unregistered personnel in and out of the country." The president's expression hardened. He'd expected pushback from foreign interests as he worked to renegotiate contracts that had been bleeding the country dry for decades, but this sounded more serious than economic pressure. "Have you briefed Colonel Sonogo?" Marcus asked, referring to his head of security. "He's waiting outside, sir. He insisted on speaking with you personally about the security assessments." Marcus nodded. "Send him in." Colonel Bakari Sonogo entered with the measured stride of a career military officer. At 55, he was a veteran of 3 different conflicts and had served as Marcus's security chief since the beginning of his presidency. His weathered face bore the marks of a man who had seen too much violence, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. "Mr. President," Sonogo began, without preamble, "we have a situation developing. Our foreign intelligence contacts have reported unusual activities by several international actors. There are indications that certain powers are not pleased with our recent policy directions." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through the implications. "Be specific, Colonel." "We have identified at least 3 separate intelligence operations currently active within our borders. The French DGSE, elements linked to multinational mining corporations, and what appears to be private military contractors with unclear sponsorship. Additionally, we've detected suspicious financial flows through banks known to service covert operations." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of the morning call to prayer from the nearby mosque. Marcus had always known that his reform agenda would create enemies, but he hadn't anticipated the scope of the opposition. "What's your assessment of the threat level?" Marcus asked. "High, sir, very high. These aren't just diplomatic maneuvers or economic pressure campaigns. The pattern suggests active destabilization efforts. I strongly recommend heightening security protocols immediately." Marcus stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the peaceful gardens where his young daughter Fatoumata often played. The irony wasn't lost on him. Outside his office, life continued normally, while inside they discussed threats to the very foundation of their nation's independence. "Double the security detail," Marcus decided. "But I won't govern from a bunker, Colonel. The people need to see their president, need to know that we're not backing down from our commitments to them." "Sir, with respect, visibility also means vulnerability. These forces have resources we're still trying to comprehend fully. I understand your concerns, but we can't let fear dictate our actions. What other intelligence do you have?" Colonel Sanago opened a secure briefing folder. "We have identified several individuals of concern. General Usman Kita, formerly of our own military, has been meeting with foreign representatives. His bank accounts show deposits from sources we can't trace. There's also Professor Laurent Dubois, the French economic advisor, who's been pushing for the mining agreement reversals." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. General Kita had been a trusted ally during the transition to civilian government. If he was involved in foreign conspiracies, it meant the threat came not just from outside their borders, but from within their own institutions. "Are you certain about Kita?" Marcus asked. "The evidence is circumstantial, but concerning. We have photographs of him meeting with known intelligence operatives, and financial records showing significant unexplained income. He's also been recruiting former military personnel for what he claims is a private security company." The president returned to his desk, his mind working through the implications. "I want complete surveillance on Kita, but discreetly. If he is involved in something, I need to know the full scope before we act. What about our own security forces? How deep might this penetration go?" "That's my primary concern, sir. If they've compromised Kita, a former general, we have to assume they've attempted to place assets throughout the system. I'm conducting a quiet review of all personnel with access to your schedule and movements." Aminata, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "Mr. President, perhaps we should consider postponing the Pan-African Economic Summit scheduled for next week if there are active threats." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Canceling the summit would send exactly the wrong message. It would show that external pressure can dictate our actions. We'll proceed with enhanced security, but we won't retreat from our commitments to African economic integration." Colonel Sanago nodded grimly. "Then we need to assume that any attempt on your life or government will likely happen during the summit. It would provide maximum symbolic impact." The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus looked at both his trusted advisors, people who had stood by him through his rise to power and the challenging early years of his presidency. "I need you both to understand something," he said quietly. "What we're doing, breaking free from the economic structures that have kept our people poor while making foreign corporations rich, this isn't just policy. It's about the future of Sahelistan and every other African nation watching to see if real independence is possible in the 21st century." He paused, looking out the window again. "They'll use every tool at their disposal to stop us. Economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and, yes, if necessary, violence. But we knew this day would come when we started down this path. Aminata's voice was steady but concerned. "Sir, your safety is paramount. Without you, the reform movement could collapse entirely." "Which is exactly why they'll target me," Marcus replied. "Colonel, I want you to develop multiple scenarios for potential threats. Use outside contractors if necessary, people with no connection to our existing security apparatus. If there are traitors in our ranks, I want to know about them before they can act." "Already underway, sir. I've reached out to some contacts from my peacekeeping days, South African and Ghanaian security specialists who can conduct independent assessments." "Good. What about intelligence sharing with friendly nations?" "Limited options there, sir. Most of our traditional partners are either compromised or have conflicting interests. The Chinese have offered assistance, but accepting might escalate tensions with Western powers." Marcus considered this. The delicate balance of international relations in West Africa meant that every decision carried cascading consequences. Accepting Chinese security assistance could provide protection, but might also provide his enemies with propaganda ammunition about foreign influence. For now, keep it domestic and use trusted external contractors only. I want a full security review of the palace, my residence, and all regular locations I visit. Also, implement random schedule changes. Make it harder for anyone tracking my movements. As if summoned by their discussion of security protocols, a soft knock came at the office door. Colonel Sanago's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm before Aminata called out, "Enter." A young aide entered nervously. "Mr. President, the Minister of Mining is here for your 10 o'clock appointment. Should I reschedule given—" "No, send him in," Marcus decided. "Life goes on, and our reforms continue." Minister Ibrahim Traoré entered with his usual enthusiasm, carrying folders of documents about the new mining legislation. At 28, he was one of the youngest ministers in the government and had been instrumental in developing the framework for renegotiating foreign mining contracts. "Mr. President," Seydu began excitedly, seemingly oblivious to the tense atmosphere. "The legal team has finished the draft legislation for the new mining tax structure. If implementing, it will increase government revenue from mining operations by 400% while still maintaining competitive rates for legitimate operators." Marcus smiled despite his concerns. Seydu's passion for economic justice was infectious and reminded him why he'd entered politics in the first place. "That's excellent work, Seydu. What's the timeline for implementation?" "We could have it ready for a legislative review within 2 weeks, sir. The key is the international arbitration clauses. We've structured them to prevent the kind of legal challenges that have derailed similar efforts in other countries." Colonel Sanago cleared his throat. "Minister, given current security concerns, perhaps the implementation should be delayed until after." "No," Marcus interrupted. "The economic reforms proceed on schedule. In fact, Seydu, I want you to accelerate the timeline if possible. We need to show that Sahelistan's sovereignty is not negotiable." As the meeting continued, none of them noticed the small electronic device that had been placed behind one of the traditional masks on the office wall, a device that was transmitting their every word to listeners hundreds of miles away, where powerful men in air-conditioned offices were already making decisions about the fate of President Marcus Konaté and the Republic of Sahelistan. The trap was being set, and Marcus was walking directly into it. 3 days had passed since the security briefing, and the atmosphere in the presidential palace had subtly shifted. Staff moved with more purpose, security personnel were more visible, and there was an underlying tension that even the most routine activities couldn't dispel. President Marcus Konaté had insisted on maintaining his normal schedule, but Colonel Sanago's security enhancements were evident everywhere. Marcus was in his private study, a smaller, more intimate space adjacent to his formal office, when Aminata entered with troubling news. The morning light filtering through the wooden shutters cast geometric patterns across the Persian rug, a gift from the Iranian ambassador during better diplomatic times. "Sir, we've received word from our embassy in Paris. The French government has formally lodged a complaint with the African Union regarding our new mining legislation. They're claiming it violates international investment treaties." Marcus looked up from the intelligence report he'd been studying. "Let me guess, they're threatening arbitration?" "Worse, sir. They're suggesting that our government lacks the legal authority to unilaterally alter existing agreements. The implication is that they don't recognize the legitimacy of our reforms." The president set down his papers and rubbed his temples. This was exactly the kind of pressure he'd expected, but the timing was concerning. International legal challenges often preceded more direct interventions. "What's our legal team's assessment?" "Confident, sir. Minister Traoré and the legal advisors believe our position is solid under international law, but the French aren't really interested in legal victories. They want to create instability and international doubt about our government's competence." A soft knock interrupted their discussion. Colonel Sinogo entered, his expression grave. "Mr. President, we need to talk privately." He glanced meaningfully at Aminata. "Aminata stays," Marcus decided. "She's been with me from the beginning, and I trust her completely." The colonel nodded grimly. "Sir, the External Security Review has uncovered some disturbing findings. We've identified at least 12 individuals within the palace staff and security detail who have financial connections to foreign entities." Marcus felt the room grow colder. 12? Are we talking about espionage or active threats? Both, potentially. Most appeared to be information gathering, people being paid to report on your schedules, meetings, and conversations. But 3 individuals have more concerning profiles. Colonel Sinogo opened a secure tablet and showed them photographs and documents. First, there's Claude Mensa, one of your senior bodyguards. He's been receiving payments through a complex financial network that ultimately traces back to French intelligence services. Second, Dr. Patricia Kone, your personal physician, has been in contact with individuals connected to pharmaceutical companies with ties to intelligence operations. Marcus's blood ran cold. His personal physician had access to his medical information, his private residence, and could potentially compromise his health directly. "And the third?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Captain David Ouattara, your helicopter pilot. He's been meeting with individuals connected to private military contractors, given that he controls your air transportation." The implications hung heavy in the air. Marcus's most trusted security personnel, the people responsible for his physical safety, had been compromised. The conspiracy wasn't just external, it had penetrated to the very heart of his protection detail. Aminata spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, if they control your medical care, your transportation, and your close protection, they could eliminate you at any time and make it appear accidental." "How long have these people been in their positions?" Marcus asked. "Mensa and Ouattara were assigned during the transition government before you took office. Dr. Kone was recommended by the previous administration's health minister, who himself is now living comfortably in exile in France." Marcus stood and began pacing, his mind racing through the implications. This isn't just about stopping the mining reforms. This level of penetration, the resources required, they're planning something massive. "Sir," Colonel Sinogo continued, "there's more. We've intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated media campaign is being prepared. If something happens to you, there are already narratives prepared about government instability, ethnic tensions, and the need for international intervention." The picture was becoming clearer and more terrifying. This wasn't just an assassination plot, it was a comprehensive regime change operation with multiple layers of preparation. "What about General Keita? Any developments there?" "That's actually the most concerning part, sir. Keita has been meeting with foreign representatives, but he's also been recruiting from within our active military units. We believe he's building a parallel command structure, possibly for a coup attempt. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face both his advisors. So we're facing potential assassination, military coup, and international intervention, all coordinated as part of a single operation. That's our assessment, yes, sir. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the threat sank in. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the palace gardens where children from the staff quarters were playing soccer. Their laughter drifted through the glass, a reminder of what he was fighting to protect. "Recommendations?" he asked finally. Colonel Sanogo consulted his notes. "Immediate isolation and detention of the compromised personnel. Complete restructuring of your security detail using only personnel we've independently verified. And, sir, I strongly recommend relocating you to a secure facility outside the capital." "No." Marcus's response was immediate and firm. "Running and hiding sends exactly the wrong message. It tells our people that their president can be intimidated, and it tells our enemies that their pressure is working. Sir, with respect, you can't lead if you're dead." Marcus turned back to his advisors. "And I can't lead if I'm cowering in a bunker while my people face the consequences of our policies alone. There has to be another way." Aminata had been thinking quietly during their exchange. "Sir, what if we turn their infiltration against them? If we know who the compromised individuals are, we can use them to feed false information while we build our real defenses elsewhere." Colonel Sanogo considered this. "Counterintelligence operations are risky, but it could work. We could set up parallel security protocols while maintaining the appearance of normal operations." "Explain what that would look like," Marcus requested. "We secretly replace key personnel while keeping the compromised individuals in place but isolated from real information. We create decoy schedules and fake security protocols for them to report while implementing real protections they don't know about." Marcus felt a spark of hope. That could give us the element of surprise when they make their move. "It's dangerous, sir. If they discover the deception, they might accelerate their timeline and act before we're fully prepared. What's our alternative? If we arrest them all now, we tip our hand completely, and they'll simply adjust their approach. At least this way, we might learn the full scope of their operation." Aminata pulled out her tablet and began taking notes. "We'll need completely new communication protocols, alternate security personnel, and a way to coordinate without using any of our existing systems." "I can handle the security restructuring," Colonel Sanogo said. "But sir, you need to understand, once we start down this path, there's no turning back. We'll be in an active intelligence war with forces that have resources we can only imagine." Marcus nodded grimly. "We've been in that war since the day I announced the mining reforms. The only difference is now we know it." A sudden commotion outside the study drew their attention. Through the window, they could see several black SUVs arriving at the palace's main entrance. Marcus recognized the vehicles. They belonged to the French embassy. "Sir," Aminata said, checking her tablet, "Ambassador Laurent Dubois is here for an unscheduled meeting. This wasn't on your calendar." Marcus and Colonel Sanogo exchanged glances. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "Show him to the formal reception room," Marcus decided. "Full protocol, complete security sweep of the room first. Colonel, I want you monitoring from the security office. Sir, I should be in the room with you." "No. If this is what I think it is, I want them to believe they still have the element of surprise. But I want every word recorded and analyzed." 20 minutes later, Marcus sat across from Ambassador Dubois in the ornate reception room. The Frenchman was in his 60s, with silver hair and the polished demeanor of a career diplomat. But there was something different about him today, an underlying tension that suggested this wasn't a routine diplomatic visit. "Mr. President," Dubois began in accented English, "I appreciate you taking this meeting on short notice. We have matters of mutual concern to discuss." "Of course, Ambassador. How can Sahelistan be of service to France today? Dubois' smile didn't reach his eyes. It's more about how France can be of service to Sahelistan, Mr. President. We're concerned about the direction your government has taken regarding international agreements and partnerships. Marcus kept his expression neutral. Our policies are designed to serve the interests of the Sahelian people, Ambassador. I'm sure France understands the importance of national sovereignty. Naturally, but sovereignty must be balanced with stability, Mr. President. The region has seen too much chaos in recent years. The veiled threat was becoming clearer. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Are you suggesting that Sahelistan's policies are creating instability, Ambassador? I'm suggesting that dramatic changes to established international relationships might have unintended consequences. Partners who have invested heavily in long-term relationships might feel compelled to protect their interests. The room seemed to grow colder. Marcus realized he was receiving what amounted to a formal warning, perhaps even an ultimatum. Ambassador, I hope you're not suggesting that France would interfere in Sahelistan's internal affairs if we don't modify our policies to suit French interests? Dubois' facade of diplomatic courtesy slipped slightly. Mr. President, I'm suggesting that wise leaders consider all possible outcomes before making irreversible decisions. The international community values stability above all else. And who speaks for this international community, Ambassador? France? France speaks for France, Mr. President, but France has many friends who share similar concerns about regional stability. Marcus stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you for your candid assessment, Ambassador. Sahelistan will continue to make decisions based on the interests of our people, as is our sovereign right. Dubois rose as well, his diplomatic mask firmly back in place. Of course, Mr. President. I hope our next conversation will be under more cooperative circumstances. After the ambassador left, Marcus remained in the reception room, his mind processing the conversation. The threat had been delivered with diplomatic language, but the message was clear: modify your policies or face the consequences. Colonel Sinogo entered moments later. Sir, we recorded everything. The linguistic analysis will be complete within the hour, but the implication seems clear. They're accelerating their timeline, Marcus concluded. That wasn't a negotiation, it was a final warning. Sir, this changes everything. If they're making direct diplomatic threats, it means they're confident their alternative plans are ready for implementation. Marcus nodded grimly. The conspiracy against him was entering its final phase. The question now wasn't whether they would act, but when and how. And with traitors in his own security detail, he was walking into danger with every breath he took. The game had entered its most dangerous phase, and President Marcus Konate was running out of time to save not just his own life, but the future of his nation. The Hassan II Conference Center in downtown Kadioma was a marvel of modern African architecture, its soaring glass walls and traditional design elements creating a space that embodied President Marcus Konate's vision for a modern, proudly African Sahelistan. Today it would host the opening ceremony of the Pan-African Economic Summit, with leaders from across the continent gathering to discuss regional integration and economic independence from former colonial powers. Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his temporary office within the center, watching as delegates and their security details arrived. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was fighting for African economic independence while surrounded by potential assassins, some of whom might be from his own security team. 3 weeks had passed since Ambassador Dubois' threatening visit, and Colonel Sinogo's counterintelligence operation was in full swing. They'd identified additional compromised personnel and were feeding false information through the network of traitors while building parallel security protocols. But the strain was showing on everyone involved. Sir, Aminata approached with her usual morning briefing, but her voice carried new urgency. Marcus turned from the window. How kind of development? The South African president's delegation has arrived, and President Okafor of Nigeria is expected within the hour, but there's been a development. General Keita has been spotted in the city. Our surveillance teams have him at the Grand Hotel meeting with individuals we can't identify. The timing can't be coincidental. Colonel Sanogo entered at that moment, his expression grim. Sir, we need to move you to the secure compound. The threat assessment has dramatically changed.
What's happened? Our intercepted communications indicate something called Operation Restoration is scheduled for today. We don't have all the details, but the chatter suggests a coordinated action during the summit. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his resolve remained steady. Canceling the summit now would be a victory for them. Leaders from 23 African nations are here specifically because Sahelistan called for this gathering. If I run, it destroys everything we've worked for. Sir, if you're dead, it also destroys everything we've worked for, Aminata pointed out. Then we make sure I don't die, Marcus replied simply. Colonel, what's our real security situation? Sanogo consulted his secure tablet. We've replaced 12 key personnel with verified assets. Your bodyguard team is now entirely comprised of operators I've known personally for years. The compromised individuals are still in place but isolated from actual protective duties. What about the venue itself? Swept 3 times by independent teams. No explosives, no surveillance devices we didn't place ourselves. But sir, if they're planning something during the summit, they have inside knowledge of our security protocols from the compromised personnel. Marcus walked to his desk and picked up his speech notes. The opening address would focus on African unity and the need to break free from economic structures that perpetuated dependency. It was exactly the message that had made him a target. There's something else, sir, Colonel Sanogo continued hesitantly. Dr. Patricia Kone has requested to give you a pre-summit medical check. She's waiting outside. Marcus and his advisors exchanged glances. Dr. Kone was one of the confirmed compromised individuals. His personal physician who had been receiving payments from foreign sources. This could be it, Aminata whispered. If they're planning something today, they might use her to incapacitate you before the ceremony. Or, Marcus said thoughtfully, this could be our chance to turn the tables. Colonel, are your people ready? Sir, I strongly advise against. I'm not going to hide from my own doctor. If she's part of their plan, we need to know what that plan is. Have your people ready, but let her in. Dr. Patricia Kone entered with her usual professional demeanor, carrying her medical bag and a tablet for notes. She was a woman in her 40s, highly respected in medical circles, and had been Marcus's physician for 2 years. The betrayal stung deeply. He had trusted her with his health and his life. Good morning, Mr. President, she said with a warm smile that now seemed sinister. I wanted to check your vitals before the big speech. These summits can be stressful. Of course, Doctor, I appreciate your thoroughness. As Dr. Kone began her examination, Marcus noticed Colonel Sanogo position himself near the door where he could observe everything. The doctor's routine seemed normal, blood pressure, pulse, temperature, but when she reached for a pre-filled syringe from her bag, both Marcus and the colonel tensed. What's in the injection, doctor? Marcus asked casually. Just a vitamin B complex shot, sir. You've been working such long hours, and I want to make sure you're at peak performance for your speech. I've never received vitamin injections before, and Dr. Kone had never suggested them. This was clearly the method of attack, a substance that would either kill him or incapacitate him during the most important speech of his presidency. Actually, Doctor, I'm feeling quite energetic today. Perhaps we can skip the injection. Dr. Kone's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of concern that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. Sir, I really think it would be beneficial. You want to be at your absolute best today. I insist we skip it, Marcus said firmly, standing up from the examination chair. For a moment, Dr. Kone hesitated, and Marcus could see her calculating her options. Then, with movements too quick for a routine medical procedure, she lunged toward him with the syringe. Colonel Yameogo was faster. His hand closed around her wrist before the needle could reach Marcus's arm, and with his other hand he drew his sidearm. "Don't move, doctor," Yameogo commanded. "Drop the syringe." Dr. Kone's professional facade crumbled, replaced by desperate calculation. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," she hissed. "This is bigger than one man, bigger than one country." "What's in the syringe?" Marcus demanded. When she didn't answer, Colonel Yameogo applied pressure to her wrist until she dropped the weapon. One of his security team members, who had been positioned outside, entered and carefully secured the syringe for analysis. "You're making a terrible mistake," Dr. Kone said as they restrained her. "You think you're protecting him, but you're condemning this entire region to chaos." "Take her to the secure facility," Marcus ordered. "I want to know everything: who recruited her, what the substance was, and what else they have planned." As Dr. Kone was escorted away, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and growing dread. They'd stopped one attack, but this was clearly just the beginning. "Sir," Amanata said, checking her watch, "the opening ceremony begins in 1 hour. The delegates are already being seated." Marcus straightened his tie and picked up his speech notes. "Then we proceed as planned. But, Colonel, I want complete lockdown protocols. No one gets near me who hasn't been verified by you personally." "Sir, they just tried to drug or poison you. We should postpone." "No. Every moment we delay gives them time to adjust their plans. If we're going to survive this, we need to stay ahead of them." The walk from the temporary office to the main auditorium normally took 5 minutes through interior corridors. Today, with heightened security, it took 15 minutes as Colonel Yameogo's team swept each section before allowing Marcus to proceed. The auditorium was impressive, curved rows of seats rising in amphitheater style, with flags from across Africa creating a colorful backdrop behind the main podium. Marcus could see the faces of his fellow African leaders, men and women who had faced their own struggles for independence and sovereignty. As he approached the podium, Marcus felt the weight of history on his shoulders. This speech would either mark a turning point in Africa's economic independence or be remembered as the last act of a leader who dared to challenge the established order. "Fellow Africans," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's advanced sound system. "We gather today not just as neighbors, but as inheritors of a great continent that has enriched the world while its people remained poor." In the audience, he noticed movement. Several individuals in the delegates section were shifting in their seats, checking their phones, making subtle gestures. His security training kicked in. These weren't the normal behaviors of summit attendees. "For too long," Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, "our resources have flowed to distant capitals while our children lacked schools, our sick lacked hospitals, and our economies remained dependent on the whims of former colonial masters." More movement in the audience. Marcus spotted at least 6 individuals who seemed more focused on him than on his words, their positions strategically distributed throughout the auditorium. Colonel Yameogo's voice crackled softly in Marcus's nearly invisible earpiece. "Sir, we've identified multiple potential threats in the audience. Recommend immediate evacuation." Marcus barely paused in his speech. "But today marks a new chapter. Today we declare that Africa's resources belong to Africa's people, and that our destiny will be determined not in Paris or London or Washington, but in Kadiyoma, in Lagos, in Addis Ababa, in every African capital where leaders have the courage to put their people first." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus noticed that some individuals weren't clapping. They were moving with purpose toward the exits and the security perimeters. The mining agreements we have renegotiated here in Sahelistan are just the beginning. We invite every African nation to join us in reclaiming our economic sovereignty." That's when the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Marcus heard Colonel Sanogo shout, "Get down!" just as the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed through the auditorium. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows as security personnel throughout the room drew weapons and delegates dove for cover. Marcus felt strong hands grab him and pull him behind the reinforced podium as bullets sparked off the marble floor where he had been standing moments before. The attack had begun, and it was coming from multiple directions. "Sir, we need to move now," Colonel Sanogo shouted over the chaos. "They've got shooters in the balcony and the main floor." As they prepared to evacuate, Marcus realized this was exactly what his enemies wanted. The president of Sahelistan fleeing in terror from an international summit, his message of African independence literally silenced by gunfire. The images would be broadcast around the world within minutes. But Marcus Konate had not come this far to be intimidated by assassins. The battle for the soul of Africa was about to begin. The Hassan II Conference Center had transformed from a symbol of African unity into a war zone in the span of 30 seconds. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows as security teams from multiple nations converged on the auditorium, their training kicking in despite the chaos. President Marcus Konate remained crouched behind the reinforced podium, his mind racing even as bullets continued to spark off the marble around him. Colonel Sanogo's security team had formed a protective perimeter, their weapons trained on multiple threat points throughout the auditorium. The attackers had positioned themselves strategically, at least 3 in the upper balcony, 2 near the main exits, and several more among what appeared to be legitimate delegates.
"Sir, we have a route to the secure extraction point," Colonel Sanogo reported through his throat microphone while maintaining visual contact with potential threats. "But we need to move in the next 60 seconds before they close the perimeter." Marcus could hear the fear in the voices of delegates seeking cover throughout the auditorium. Presidents, prime ministers, and ministers from across Africa, leaders who had come to discuss their continent's future, were now potential casualties in an assassination attempt that threatened to destabilize the entire region. "Colonel," Marcus said, his voice steadied despite the danger. "Are our people in position to neutralize the threats?" "Sir, this is not the time for tactical discussions. We need to get you out of here." But Marcus was thinking beyond his immediate safety. If he fled the summit under fire, the message would be clear to every African leader present. Challenging the established order brought violent consequences. The psychological impact would set back African independence movements for decades. "Negative, Colonel. We stand and fight here. Signal your teams. I want those shooters neutralized, not avoided." "Sir, with all due respect, this is insane. You're not a soldier." "Today I am," Marcus interrupted, drawing strength from his resolve. "Every African leader in this room needs to see that we don't run from bullies, no matter how well armed they are." The sound of automatic weapons fire intensified, but Marcus noticed something encouraging: return fire from multiple positions. Colonel Sanogo's security teams were engaging the attackers with precision and coordination. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear the tactical communications. "Tango down in Section 3. 2 shooters neutralized near Exit Alpha. Unknown number still active in Delegate Section." President Okafor of Nigeria, one of Africa's most respected leaders, had taken cover behind an overturned table 20 meters away. Despite the danger, he called out to Marcus, "Brother President, your courage honors us all, but please seek safety." Marcus's response carried across the auditorium despite the gunfire. "Safety comes from standing together, President Okafor. We will not be intimidated on African soil." Colonel Sanogo's tactical assessment came through the earpiece. "Sir, we've identified the primary threats, but there's something else. Multiple vehicles are approaching the building's perimeter.
This may be a coordinated ground assault. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't just an assassination attempt, it was the beginning of a coup. While attention was focused on the conference center, other elements of the conspiracy were likely moving against key government installations throughout Kadioma. Aminata, Marcus called to his chief of staff, who was taking cover nearby. Can you reach the broadcasting center? Sir, this is not the time for media management. This is exactly the time. If we're fighting a coup, the people need to know what's happening. Can you get through to the national television station? Aminata pulled out her secure satellite phone, one of several communication devices Colonel Sonogo had insisted on after discovering the security breaches. I'm trying, sir, but wait, I'm getting through to the director. While Aminata worked to establish communication with the media, the firefight in the auditorium reached a crescendo. Marcus could see Colonel Sonogo's team methodically advancing on the remaining shooter positions, their professional training evident in every movement. Tango neutralized in Section 7, final shooter position isolated, moving to secure. The gunfire gradually subsided, replaced by the sounds of security teams calling clear from various sections of the auditorium. But Marcus knew this was only the first wave. Sir, Aminata reported, I have the television director. The station is secure, but they've been ordered by unknown authorities to cease broadcasting. There are armed men at the transmission facilities. Can they get us on the air? They have emergency backup systems, but it would be dangerous to activate them. Marcus made his decision. Do it! I need to address the nation immediately. Colonel Sonogo had returned to his position beside Marcus, his tactical vest showing evidence of the firefight. Sir, the immediate area is secure, but we have bigger problems. Satellite imagery shows military convoys moving toward the capital from 3 directions. General Keita appears to be implementing a full military takeover.
What about loyal military units? That's complicated, sir. We're not certain which units remain loyal. Keita has been working on this for months, possibly years. He may have compromised more of the military leadership than we realized. Through the auditorium's damaged sound system, which his technical team had quickly repaired, Marcus could hear reports from across the city. Radio communications indicated fighting at the presidential palace, the parliament building, and the main military base. This was a comprehensive assault on Sahelistan's democratic government. President Okafor approached Marcus's position, his own security detail flanking him. The elderly Nigerian leader's face showed a mixture of admiration and concern. President Konate, my friend, this is clearly bigger than an attack on you personally. What do you need from the continental community? The question reminded Marcus that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. 23 African leaders were present, representing millions of people and significant military capabilities. President Okafor, I need you and the other leaders to bear witness to what is happening here. This attack on Sahelistan sovereignty is an attack on every nation that dares to chart an independent course. You have our support. But what can we do practically? Marcus looked around the damaged auditorium, seeing not destruction, but opportunity. Help me finish what we started. Let's hold the summit session right here, right now, while the bullets are still echoing. Let's show the world that African leaders don't abandon their principles when faced with violence. Colonel Sonogo looked at Marcus as if he'd lost his mind. Sir, there are still hostile forces in the city, possibly in this building. Continuing the summit is militarily impossible. Then we make it possible, Marcus replied with conviction. Aminata, can you get the television connection established here in the auditorium? The technical team thinks they can route a signal through the backup systems. Yes, sir. Do it. And Colonel, I need you to coordinate with the other security details present. We have protection from some of the best security services in Africa right here in this room.
As if responding to Marcus's confidence, President Mandela of South Africa stepped forward. At 73, she was the elder stateswoman of the continent and commanded immense respect. President Konate speaks wisdom. If we flee now, we validate the use of violence against democratic governments. My security chief reports that our aircraft can provide air cover for this facility. Other leaders began voicing their support. President Diallo of Senegal, my Republican Guard units are at the airport. They can reinforce this position. President Sankara of Ghana, our intelligence services have assets in the region. We can provide real-time intelligence on the coup force's movements. Marcus felt a surge of hope. What had started as an assassination attempt was transforming into a continental response to foreign-backed destabilization. "Sir," Aminata reported, "we have a television connection. You can address the nation and the continent in 5 minutes." As the technical teams worked to establish the broadcast capability, Colonel Sanogo received an update that changed everything. "Sir, General Kita is requesting to speak with you directly. He's offering terms for a peaceful transition." Marcus almost laughed at the audacity. "He tries to kill me and then wants to negotiate?" "Sir, it might be worth hearing what he has to say. If we can end this without more bloodshed?" "Colonel, the moment I negotiate with coup plotters is the moment I legitimize their actions. Connect the broadcast. It's time to speak directly to the people of Sahelistan." As the makeshift television studio came online in the damaged auditorium, with African leaders standing in solidarity behind him and the scars of battle visible on the walls, Marcus prepared to deliver perhaps the most important speech of his life. But first, he needed to survive the next wave of attacks that were already approaching the building. The emergency broadcast began with an image that would be remembered throughout African history. President Marcus Konate standing at a bullet-scarred podium in a damaged auditorium flanked by 23 other African leaders who had chosen to stand with him rather than flee to safety. The symbolism was powerful and immediate. Citizens of Sahelistan, brothers and sisters across Africa, what you are witnessing today is not just an attack on your president, but an assault on the very idea that African nations can determine their own destiny. In living rooms, shops, and gathering places across Sahelistan, people watched in stunned silence as their president addressed them from what was clearly a battle zone. Behind him, they could see the other African leaders, figures they recognized from news broadcasts, standing in solidarity despite the obvious danger. General Kita and his foreign sponsors believed they could silence the voice of African independence with bullets and bombs. They were wrong. Colonel Sanogo monitored multiple communication channels while Marcus spoke, coordinating with security details from across the continent who were now working together to defend the conference center. The building had become an impromptu fortress, but intelligence reports showed that larger forces were approaching. "Sir," Colonel Sanogo whispered urgently during a pause in the broadcast, "we have approximately 1 hour before a mechanized column reaches our position. General Keita has committed significant military assets to this operation." Marcus nodded, but continued his address. "The mining agreements we signed, the economic partnerships we forged with our African brothers and sisters, these were not just policy changes. They were declarations that we will no longer accept poverty in the midst of plenty, dependency in the face of abundance." Throughout the capital city, something remarkable was happening. Despite the presence of coup forces and the sound of distant gunfire, people were emerging from their homes and businesses. The broadcast was showing them that their president had not fled, that African leaders were standing together, and that the fight for independence was not over. Aminata, monitoring social media and communication networks, reported to Marcus during another pause. "Sir, the response is extraordinary. People are gathering in the streets not to flee, but to show support. We're seeing crowds forming near government buildings, and there are reports of some military units openly declaring their loyalty to the constitutional government." President Ofor of Nigeria stepped forward during the broadcast. "May I speak, Brother President?" Marcus gestured for him to approach the microphone. The sight of Nigeria's respected leader sharing the podium sent a powerful message across the continent. "People of Sahelistan," President Okafor began in his commanding voice, "what happens in your nation today will determine the future of every African country. President Konaté's courage in the face of foreign-backed violence reminds us why we must stand together against those who would keep our continent divided and dependent." The broadcast continued for another 10 minutes, with each African leader making brief statements of support. The message was clear. This was not just Sahelistan's fight, it was Africa's fight. But even as the political victory played out on television screens across the continent, the military situation was deteriorating rapidly. Colonel Sanogo's latest intelligence report painted a grim picture. "Sir, we have 3 major problems. First, the mechanized column approaching from the north includes main battle tanks and armored personnel carriers, more firepower than we can handle with small arms. Second, General Keita has control of the national airport and is preventing any outside military assistance from landing. Third, we've confirmed that foreign special forces are operating with the coup units." Marcus absorbed this information while maintaining his composure for the cameras. The broadcast had achieved its political objective, showing the world that African leaders would not be intimidated, but now they faced the practical challenge of survival. President Mandela of South Africa had been coordinating quietly with her security chief during the broadcast. She approached Marcus with a proposal. "President Konaté, our intelligence services have assets throughout this region. We can provide real-time satellite intelligence and coordinate with loyal military units, but you need to make a strategic decision. Do we hold this position and risk a siege, or do we relocate to a more defensible location?" Before Marcus could answer, Colonel Sanogo received an urgent communication. "Sir, we have movement from an unexpected source. Colonel Traoré, commander of the Presidential Guard at the palace, has broken through the siege lines and is approaching with 3 companies of loyal troops." This was the first unequivocally good news of the day. Colonel Traoré was a career officer whose loyalty had never been questioned, and his Presidential Guard units were among the best trained in the military. "How long until they reach us?" 20 minutes, sir, but they're being pursued by superior forces." Marcus made his decision. "Signal Colonel Traoré to proceed to the Palace District and establish a defensive perimeter there. We'll move to join him, but first we complete the summit session." "Sir, that's militarily impossible." "Colonel, everything we've done today has been militarily impossible, yet here we are. The summit session continues." What followed was unprecedented in African political history. In a damaged auditorium, under the protection of hastily assembled security forces from across the continent, 24 African leaders conducted formal business while the sound of approaching combat grew closer. They signed the Kadioma Accords, a comprehensive agreement for African economic cooperation that included mutual defense clauses, coordinated resource development, and a commitment to resist foreign economic pressure. Each signature was an act of defiance against the forces trying to tear down African independence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced as the last signature was added to the accords, "history will remember this day not for the violence of our enemies, but for the unity of our response." But even as they celebrated this political victory, the military situation reached a crisis point. Colonel Sanogo's communications with his command center brought urgent news.
"Sir, the mechanized column has reached the city center. We have reports of tank fire at government buildings. Additionally, General Keita has declared himself provisional president and is demanding your immediate surrender." Marcus looked around the auditorium at the African leaders who had risked their lives to stand with him. These were not men and women who would be easily intimidated. "What's our tactical situation for movement to the Palace District?" "Difficult but possible. The route is partially controlled by coup forces, but Colonel Traoré's breakthrough has created an opening. We'll need to move in convoy with heavy security escort." President Diallo of Senegal had been consulting with his own security detail. "President Konaté, my people can provide armored vehicles for the convoy. We came prepared for various contingencies." The coordination between African security services was remarkable. Within minutes, they had assembled a convoy capable of fighting its way through the city. South African armored vehicles, Senegalese military escort, Nigerian intelligence coordination, and Ghanaian communications support. As they prepared to leave the conference center, Marcus took one last look at the damaged auditorium where history had been made. The bullet holes in the walls and the overturned furniture would remain, but so would the memory of African leaders standing together against impossible odds. "Sir, Aminata reports we're receiving word that the broadcast has had an impact beyond our borders. The African Union is calling an emergency session and several continental powers are offering military assistance." "And domestically?" "Even better, sir. There are reports of spontaneous demonstrations in support of the government in every major city. Some military units that had been neutral are now openly declaring for the constitutional government." As the convoy prepared to depart, Colonel Sanogo received one more crucial piece of intelligence. "Sir, our sources indicate that General Keita is under pressure from his foreign sponsors to complete the coup quickly. They're concerned about the international reaction to the summit broadcast." Marcus smiled grimly as he took his position in the lead armored vehicle. "Then let's make sure we give them something more to worry about." The convoy rolled out of the conference center and into the streets of Kadioma, where the real battle for Sahelistan's future was about to begin. The convoy's journey through the streets of Kadioma was unlike anything in the city's modern history. Armored vehicles flying the flags of multiple African nations moved in tactical formation through neighborhoods where the sounds of distant gunfire mixed with the voices of crowds that had gathered despite the danger. Marcus watched through the reinforced windows of his South African-provided armored vehicle as ordinary citizens lined the streets, many holding improvised signs supporting the constitutional government. The coup forces had expected to seize control of a demoralized population, but the broadcast from the conference center had transformed the political landscape. "Sir," Colonel Sanogo reported from the front passenger seat, "we're approaching Checkpoint Alpha. Colonel Traoré's forces have secured the intersection, but they report contact with enemy reconnaissance units in the area." Through his communications headset, Marcus could hear the tactical coordination between security forces from across Africa. Senegalese officers were directing traffic flow, Nigerian intelligence was providing real-time updates on enemy positions, and South African armor was ready to respond to any threats. The conspiracy that had sought to isolate and destroy Sahelistan instead created the most effective Pan-African military cooperation in decades. President Okafor, traveling in the same vehicle, observed the crowds with the wisdom of his years in leadership. "Brother Marcus, you have achieved something remarkable today. These people are not just supporting their president, they are embracing the idea that Africa can stand united against external pressure." "The real test comes now," Marcus replied. "We have to prove that unity can be translated into effective resistance." As they approached the government district, the evidence of the coup attempt became more visible. Several buildings showed damage from small arms fire, and the burnt-out hulks of vehicles marked the locations of earlier fighting. But Colonel Traoré's presidential guard units had established a secure perimeter around the key government installations. The convoy arrived at the presidential palace to find it transformed into a military command center. Colonel Traoré,
a lean man in his 40s with the bearing of a professional soldier, met them at the entrance with his situation report. "Mr. President, we've secured this sector, but the overall situation remains fluid. General Keita's forces control the airport, the main military base, and several strategic points throughout the city. However, their support is not as broad as they expected." "Explain," Marcus requested as they moved toward the palace's secure command center. "Sir, at least 40% of military units have declared loyalty to the constitutional government. Another 30% remain neutral, waiting to see how events develop. Keita only has solid control over about 30% of our forces."
This was better news than Marcus had dared hope. A successful coup required overwhelming military support, and it appeared that General Keita had significantly overestimated his influence within the armed forces. In the command center, a sophisticated communications hub that Colonel Sanogo had established during the security upgrades, Marcus could see the full scope of the situation. Large screens displayed satellite imagery of the city, radio communications from loyal units, and intelligence reports from across the region. Aminata had already established contact with international media and friendly governments. "Sir, the international response is developing rapidly. The African Union has condemned the coup attempt and is threatening sanctions against any nation that recognizes an illegal government. France and other former colonial powers are maintaining official neutrality, but their diplomatic silence speaks volumes." President Mandela of South Africa joined the planning session, her security chief providing additional intelligence. "President Konate, our satellite assets show that General Keita's main force, approximately 2 battalion equivalents with armor support, is positioned at the airport. He's clearly waiting for something." "Foreign reinforcements," Colonel Sanogo concluded. "Our intercepts suggest that private military contractors are scheduled to arrive within the next 6 hours." The pieces of the conspiracy were becoming clearer. General Keita lacked the domestic support for a successful coup, so the plan relied on foreign military assistance to tip the balance. But the delay caused by the resistance at the conference center had disrupted their timeline. "What are our options?" Marcus asked his assembled advisors. Colonel Traoré spread out tactical maps of the city. "We can maintain defensive positions and wait for international support, or we can take offensive action while we still have the initiative." "Explain the offensive option." "Sir, General Keita's forces are concentrated in a few key locations, but they're also isolated from each other. If we can coordinate simultaneous attacks on his strongpoints, we might be able to collapse his position before foreign reinforcements arrive." President Delalo of Senegal had been consulting with his military advisor. "President Konate, I can authorize direct military assistance from our Republican Guard units. They're already at the airport's perimeter, different airport facilities, but they can provide support for any operation against the coup forces." The room fell silent as Marcus considered the implications. Authorizing offensive military action would escalate the conflict, but it might be the only way to end it quickly and preserve Sahelistan's democratic government. "Colonel Traoré, what's your assessment of success probability?" "Sir, if we coordinate with our African allies and can neutralize General Keita's command structure quickly, I estimate a 70% chance of success. But if foreign reinforcements arrive before we complete the operation, those odds reverse dramatically." Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had risked everything to stand with him. African leaders who could have fled to safety, military officers who had chosen loyalty over personal advancement, and staff members who had remained despite mortal danger. "Gentlemen, ladies," Marcus began, "we face a choice that will determine not just the fate of Sahelistan, but the future of African independence. We can wait and hope that international pressure will resolve this crisis, or we can act decisively to defend our sovereignty."
President Okafor spoke first. "Brother President, Nigeria stands ready to support whatever decision you make." Each African leader present offered similar commitments, transforming what had begun as an assassination attempt into a continental test of resolve. "Very well," Marcus decided. "Colonel Traoré, prepare for simultaneous operations against all coup strongpoints. Colonel Sanogo, coordinate with our African allies to maximize our combined capabilities. Aminata, ensure that international media has full access to document what happens next." As the planning session intensified, Marcus received an unexpected communication. General Kita was requesting direct dialogue. "Sir, General Kita is offering to negotiate a power-sharing arrangement. He claims this can all be resolved without further bloodshed." Marcus almost smiled at the irony. "After trying to assassinate me, he wants to share power? Sir, it might be worth hearing his terms. If we can end this politically. Colonel, the moment I negotiate with coup plotters, I legitimize their actions and invite future attempts. Connect me to General Kita, but not for negotiations, for demands." The communication link crackled to life, and Marcus found himself speaking directly to the man who had tried to kill him. "General Kita," Marcus began, his voice cold and controlled, "I'm calling to offer you one opportunity to surrender peacefully." Kita's response carried a mixture of desperation and defiance. "President Konate, you don't understand the forces at work here. This is bigger than both of us. Foreign powers have invested too much in this operation to allow it to fail."
"Then they've made a poor investment, General. Surrender your forces and you'll face trial under Sahelian law. Continue this illegal action and you'll face the combined forces of 24 African nations." "You're bluffing! African unity is a myth. When the shooting really starts, your allies will abandon you." Marcus looked around the command center at the African leaders and their military advisors working together with unprecedented coordination. "General, look at your intelligence reports. Look at the crowds in the streets supporting the constitutional government. Look at the military units that have declared loyalty to the legal government. Your coup has already failed. You just haven't admitted it yet." The conversation ended with Keita refusing to surrender, setting the stage for the final confrontation. As night fell over Kadioma, the forces of democracy and dictatorship prepared for a battle that would determine whether African nations could truly defend their sovereignty in the modern world. Operation Constitutional Restoration was about to begin. The coordinated assault began at 0400 hours, under the cover of darkness that would soon give way to what Marcus hoped would be a new dawn for Sahelistan. From the Presidential Palace Command Center, he monitored multiple operations simultaneously as African military forces conducted the most complex joint operation in the continent's modern history. "Phoenix Base to command," crackled the voice of Colonel Traoré over the secure communications network. "Presidential Guard units are in position at the television station. Resistance is lighter than expected." "Leopard Base to command," reported the Senegalese Republican Guard commander. "We have visual contact with the airport perimeter defenses. Enemy armor positions identified and marked for engagement." "Eagle Base to command," came the crisp voice of the South African Special Forces coordinator. "Target package at the central bank is ready for neutralization. Hostages secured." Marcus had insisted that the operation minimize civilian casualties while demonstrating overwhelming force. The goal was not just military victory, but political legitimacy, showing that the constitutional government could protect its people more effectively than the coup forces. President Ofakra stood beside Marcus, both men understanding that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in African history. "Brother President," Ofakra observed, "what we see here tonight is proof that African nations can defend themselves when they work together."
Colonel Sanogo coordinated the tactical elements while monitoring international communications. Sir, we're receiving reports that the foreign military contractors expected to support General Keita have been denied landing rights by every nation in the region. The African Union's emergency session has resulted in a complete diplomatic isolation of the coup attempt. The first phase of the operation targeted communication and propaganda facilities. Within 30 minutes, loyal forces had secured the national television and radio stations, the central telephone exchange, and the internet infrastructure that General Keita had been using to spread disinformation about the government. Sir, Aminata reported from her media coordination station, we now have full control of national communications. The international media are reporting extensively on the African solidarity displayed here, and public opinion across the continent strongly supports our resistance. The second phase focused on isolating General Keita's main force at the airport. Rather than direct assault, the combined African forces established a complete encirclement while offering individual soldiers opportunities to surrender and rejoin the constitutional forces. Colonel Traoré's voice came through with an update that changed everything. Command, this is Phoenix Base. We have General Keita's second-in-command, Colonel Diabate, requesting to speak with President Konate. He claims he has information about foreign involvement that changes the situation. Marcus made the decision to take the call personally. Colonel Diabate had been considered loyal until recently, and his participation in the coup had been one of the most shocking betrayals. Colonel Diabate, Marcus began when the communication link was established. I'm listening. Mr. President, Diabate's voice carried exhaustion and what sounded like regret. I need you to know that General Keita has been receiving direct operational control from foreign intelligence services. This isn't just about mining contracts. They're planning to establish permanent foreign military bases in Sahelistan as part of a broader regional strategy. Marcus felt his blood cold run. Foreign military bases would effectively end Sahelistan's sovereignty and provide a launching point for interventions throughout West Africa. What evidence do you have of this? Sir, I have recordings of planning sessions, financial records, and communications with foreign operatives. General Keita promised me and others that we would maintain significant control, but the reality is that we were being prepared to become administrators for a foreign occupation.
President Mandela, who had been monitoring the communication, stepped forward. President Konate, if this intelligence is accurate, it changes the entire context of this conflict. We're not just dealing with a coup, we're preventing a foreign occupation. Colonel Diabate continued, Sir, many of the officers supporting General Keita were not told about the foreign control aspects. If they knew the full truth, I believe most would abandon the coup immediately. Marcus saw an opportunity to end the crisis with minimal bloodshed while exposing the full scope of the foreign conspiracy. Colonel Diabate, are you willing to broadcast this information to all military units currently supporting the coup? Yes, sir. I'm willing to testify publicly about everything I know. Within minutes, Aminata had arranged for Colonel Diabate's testimony to be broadcast live from the secured television station. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Fellow officers, Diabate began, his voice carrying across every radio and television in the country. I stand before you as someone who made a terrible mistake. I believed General Keita when he claimed we were acting to save Sahelistan from economic chaos, but I have learned that our real purpose was to prepare our country for foreign military occupation. He went on to detail the foreign involvement, including specific plans for military bases, economic control mechanisms, and the systematic replacement of Sahelian officials with foreign-approved administrators. The broadcast had an electric effect on the military situation. Within an hour, Colonel Sanogo reported that entire units were abandoning their positions and declaring loyalty to the constitutional government. Sir, We're receiving surrender requests from 5 separate military units that had been supporting the coup. The airport perimeter is collapsing as individual soldiers abandon their positions. But the most significant development came when General Keita himself requested to speak with Marcus. President Konate, Keita's voice sounded defeated and bitter. Colonel Diabate has destroyed any possibility of completing our mission. My foreign contacts are demanding that I eliminate him and continue the operation, but I no longer have sufficient forces. General, you have one choice remaining. Surrender unconditionally and face trial under Sicilian law, or continue this doomed operation and face the consequences. There was a long pause before Keita responded. Sir, there's something you need to know. This operation against Sahelistan was intended as a test case. If successful, similar operations were planned for Ghana, Senegal, and eventually Nigeria. The goal is to prevent any African nation from achieving true economic independence. Marcus looked around the command center at the African leaders who had stood with him throughout the crisis. The conspiracy had been even broader than they had imagined. General Keita, are you willing to provide full details about these broader plans? Yes, sir. I'm willing to cooperate completely. I was a fool to believe I could control forces much larger than myself. The final phase of the crisis began with General Keita's formal surrender at sunrise. As the first light of dawn illuminated the presidential palace, Marcus stood before the international media, with the African leaders who had transformed a coup attempt into a demonstration of continental unity. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, addressing cameras that would carry his words across Africa and around the world. What you have witnessed here in Sahelistan over the past 24 hours represents more than the defeat of a coup attempt. It represents the birth of true African solidarity in the face of those who would divide and control us. Behind him stood President Okafor of Nigeria, President Mandela of South Africa, President Diallo of Senegal, and 19 other African leaders who had chosen to risk their lives rather than abandon the principle of African independence. The evidence we have gathered reveals a conspiracy that extended far beyond our borders, one that threatened the sovereignty of multiple African nations. But the response of our continental community proves that when African nations stand together, we are stronger than any force that seeks to divide and control us. As Marcus concluded his remarks, Colonel Traoré approached with the final military update. Sir, General Keita and his remaining supporters are in custody. We have secured all strategic locations and normal government operations can resume immediately. But Marcus knew that the real victory was not military, it was political and spiritual. The successful defense of Sahelistan had demonstrated that African nations could work together effectively, that their people would support leaders who stood for genuine independence, and that foreign attempts to control the continent through proxies and puppets could be defeated. The Kadioma Accords, signed in a bullet-scarred auditorium under the protection of continental solidarity, had become the foundation for a new era of African cooperation.
6 months after the failed coup attempt, President Marcus Konate stood once again at the podium of the Hassan II Conference Center, but this time the setting was dramatically different. The bullet holes had been repaired, but bronze plaques now marked the spots where African leaders had stood together under fire, transforming the damaged auditorium into a symbol of continental resilience. The Second Pan-African Economic Summit had drawn representatives from every nation on the continent, along with observers from around the world who came to witness the implementation of the Kadioma Accords. "Fellow Africans," Marcus began, his voice carrying to a much larger audience than 6 months earlier. "We gathered today not as individual nations seeking survival, but as partners in the greatest economic transformation our continent has ever known." The statistics spoke for themselves.
Sahelstan's renegotiated mining contracts had increased government revenues by 300%, funding new schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects. More importantly, the model had been adopted by 12 other African nations, creating a coordinated approach to resource management that strengthened the entire continent. General Keita and his co-conspirators had been tried and convicted of treason, but their testimony had revealed the full scope of foreign interference in African affairs. The evidence had been shared with every African government, creating unprecedented awareness of the methods used to maintain external control. Colonel Diabaté, whose decision to reveal the truth had been crucial to ending the crisis, had been sentenced to prison but with the possibility of parole based on his cooperation. More importantly, his testimony had led to the identification and expulsion of foreign intelligence operatives throughout the region. President Okafor of Nigeria approached the podium to deliver remarks that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "today I can announce that the Federal Republic of Nigeria will formally adopt the Sahelistan model for all future resource extraction agreements. We do this not just for economic reasons, but because President Konate and this great nation have shown us that African dignity is not negotiable." Similar announcements followed from leaders across the continent. The African Unity Defense Pact, another outcome of the crisis, had created mutual defense guarantees that made future foreign interventions far more difficult and costly. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. The successful defense of Sahelistan had shattered the myth that African nations were powerless against foreign pressure. Young people across the continent now spoke of the Kadioma spirit, the idea that unity and courage could overcome any external threat. Dr. Patricia Cohn, the physician who had attempted to poison Marcus, had provided crucial intelligence about foreign recruitment and operational methods in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her information had led to the dismantling of an entire network of foreign assets across West Africa. Ambassador Dubois of France had been quietly recalled to Paris, his diplomatic career effectively ended by the exposure of his role in the conspiracy. The French government, facing international scrutiny and African unity it had not anticipated, was forced to publicly distance itself from the failed operation. Marcus walked through the palace gardens where his daughter Fatuma now played freely, no longer requiring the heavy security that had once been necessary. The peacocks still roamed the grounds, but now they were joined by children from across the diplomatic community, a symbol of the new openness that characterized Sahelistan's relationships. Colonel Sanogo approached with the daily security briefing, though these meetings had become more routine discussions of normal protective measures rather than crisis management. "Sir, intelligence reports indicate that the foreign networks we disrupted have abandoned their operations in this region. The cost of the failed coup and the continental response have made similar operations prohibitively expensive and politically dangerous." Marcus nodded, watching his daughter chase butterflies among the flowers. "And our African partners?" "The integration continues ahead of schedule, sir. The Joint Intelligence Sharing Network has prevented 3 separate foreign interference attempts in other nations. The economic cooperation agreements are producing results beyond our most optimistic projections." Aminata joined them with a smile that had become common since the crisis ended. "Sir, the latest polling shows 93% approval for the government's policies. More importantly, similar approval ratings for African unity initiatives across the continent." As the sun set over Kadioma, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The conspiracy that sought to destroy Sahelistan's independence had instead forged something stronger, a continental consciousness that put African interests first. The shadow conspiracy had been defeated not just by military force or political maneuvering, but by the simple power of people who refused to accept that their destiny should be determined by others.
President Marcus Konate looked out over his peaceful capital city, knowing that the greatest victory was not his survival, but the birth of an Africa that would never again stand alone against those who would divide and control it. The shadow had lifted, and the dawn of African independence had truly begun. The end.